Does it bother you at all that the Netflix algorithm knows you better than anyone else?
It's sad, really. It's very sad, but any friend is a good friend, is what I say.
Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey there, Jim.
John, how you doing?
I'm good. We are back.
I can't be more excited.
Yes.
It's an even segment, which I like because it takes some pressure off me.
You don't have to be odd
That's right.
because it's even. Yes, it is 5:02. This time we're going to listen to chapter 2 of The Linking Rings. I'm glad it works out that way this season. There's not going to be any discrepancy between episode number and chapter number, less for me to worry about. And we're also first going to revisit some interesting thoughts from our good friend Suzanne.
And she is a good friend. It's nice to have somebody of her caliber as a sounding board or a check-in person or somebody we can both turn to and ask a difficult question about magic or life in general. And to have Suzanne on the speed dial, as you
Yeah.
were, is a luxury for both of us.
Yes, I might have mentioned this in a past episode. She taught me her version of Cards Across that she did at a book event I was at. And she showed up and somebody said, "Can you do a trick?" And she said, "Sure." And then afterwards showed me how to do it, and then got on Zoom with me to show me what would make it smoother. Very simple little nuanced things that only a professional like that would know how to do. And then you realize, hey, like you say, we have her on speed dial.
That's right.
You have a
And
question.
she's gonna teach that to me. I hope that's okay by you, but, I have, I have a show, that I am, actively doing where magic would be sort of a sidebar, if you will, to that show, but, I reached out to her and she said, "Anytime you want. Anytime you want." And how about that? I mean, you're tapping into somebody who is a genius at this, but on top of that, she's a great teacher, she's a
Mhm.
great thinker about magic, and it's really so cool that she is, that accessible to not just us, to a lot of
Mhm.
people, but really, to us.
Exactly us. So anyway, when we talked to Suzanne, one of the couple times she's been on the show, one of the things we asked her about was, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that beginning magicians make? What do you think is the biggest mistake or the biggest misconception that a beginning magician might have as they're getting into magic?
That they have to learn 500 tricks.
Mm.
You need one trick, do it well. That's the only thing you focus on is that one trick. That's it. When you get that, then you get another trick. And that's all you focus on. That's it.
That's kind of an Al Schneider way of teaching, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's what he taught you, is that we're not moving on, and Eugene was a big proponent of that too,
Yep. And so was Sty Vernon a big proponent of that. When I went out and worked at the Magic Castle the first time in '88, I asked him if you could only give one piece of advice, what would that advice be? And he said, only learn one trick at a time and don't move on until you have it. And I 100% agree with that counsel.
Let me just make this more kind of global, I guess. Wha what are magicians doing wrong?
Oh, goodness, where do I start? Okay, other than trying to learn absolutely every single trick in the book and buying all sorts of props and gimmicks and tossing them in their drawer because they'll buy it and they'll go, that's crap. And then they toss it in their drawer and then they don't understand why they bought it in the first place. So they think that the more stuff I have, the more knowledge I have, the more books I have, the more YouTube videos that I watch, the more. That's magic hoarding. That's all that is. And if you're hoarding magic, you're not really learning anything. You're just stuffing your brain full of all sorts of superfluous stuff. And I'm not going to say they're doing it wrong. I'm going to say they're doing it inefficiently. When I teach at conventions, the most common question that I always get at a convention or a lecture is, "What are you working on now?" I'm training my horse. We're remodeling our bathroom. What do you mean? What am I working on now? You need another trick? I don't need another trick. You learn one trick and you learn it so that your body knows it. Because once your body knows it, the physicality of it, the timing of it, the breath of it, the what you expect to get from your audience from it, that leaves your mental side is now open to play and to riff off whatever they say. So it makes it look like ad-libbing. So it's kind of like when you're learning to drive, when you first are learning to drive, you need to be able to steer, keep the correct speed. If you're doing with a stick shift car, know how to shift and not run off the road and not hit anything. And when you're learning, that's terrifying. But now that I've been driving for feels like longer than I've been alive, I don't even think about it. And I can be talking on the phone and see something that I have to avoid in the road and not hit anything because my body already knows what to do. So you've got to get it so that your body knows what to do to give your brain the room to play.
Well, that's kind of a perfect analogy, isn't it?
It really is that it's something I remember you saying to me years ago when we were working on a play and you were having trouble remembering a line. I can't imagine a situation where that happened with you, but it must have happened at one point.
Yeah.
And you said that you'd learned from being on stage that if you perform the action, if your body does the motion that you're supposed to do at that point, your brain will remember the words because it's
That's
in your
correct.
muscles. It's in your
Yeah.
muscles.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And there are many shows that I do over and over and over again, and my body knows where to go. And in so doing, even like I was this past holiday season, I was doing a show, and there's a song that we sing, Christmas in Killarney. And I'm never absolutely certain what the lyrics are until I get to that second and my body goes like this, and I remember it's this, and it used to just absolutely panic me to think, I don't know what am I well, I don't know what I'm supposed to say in this song, and then, now I kind of enjoy it. I kind of enjoy the fact that I don't know what my lyrics are. Oh, there it is. It's this, and, so, yeah, once your body knows something, it can help your mind remember things, at least my mind. And, I don't know if it's true straight across the board, but I have heard other actors and much better actors than me corroborate this, that, once you get it, it's there for good.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to know that your body will help you do that. But it's also the message of you don't need a million tricks. We've heard it in various forms from different people. I remember talking, I think it's season one with Morgan and West when they were a duo, talking about, they are not out there looking for new tricks. They just work on the ones they have. And if they need to add something, they will. But it's really just about making the most of what you've already learned. And
Yeah.
that's what you find if you follow Suzanne around like I have done when she's doing restaurant magic. She has not a huge repertoire there. She doesn't need it. She does not need it because she's just going to do these 3 or 4 things really, really well and blow people away. And then she'll always have something, tucked away in case it's a repeat customer that she can wow them with. But she's not out buying every new trick. And not that there's anything wrong, Jim, with buying tricks that you put in a drawer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Eugene Berger, who has not come up yet in this episode, that's one of the rooms of magic, and I happen to own that room.
You
So
make money anytime anyone uses that room.
that's right. Exactly.
That's very, very smart.
Well, again, I can't be happier that Suzanne is, our friend and, a wizard and a kind human, that is willing to teach us high level stuff because she's our friend. Although I think you could probably, if you wanted to, take lessons from Suzanne, and she would teach you high level stuff too, if you're listening to this and you're
She
thinking,
absolutely would. She
yeah,
absolutely would, and, like David Williamson, although she hasn't set up a school online, but she will do Zoom things and consultations and work with you to whatever degree you need. So I will put her website, in the show notes, and if I can remember, I'll put the full interview in the show notes as well,
yeah,
in case you wanna refer back to, everything she had to say in that interview.
smart, kind, and super experienced. You could go so much in the wrong direction. Go this direction.
Ah,
Contact Suzanne if you need some help with your magic.
I love that, and speaking of,
Uh-oh.
I
Nice
love that.
transition there,
Thank
chief.
you. It's not really a great transition.
It
It's kind
wasn't
of
bad. It wasn't
it's a
horrible.
yes, this episode, I'm going first because it's a even episode, although I have you to thank for this, I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
Pretty
I
sure
like it.
you're the one who turned me on to this many, many, many years ago, in which you said there's a Canadian TV series about a theater,
Oh, good.
in
Yeah,
Canada. And I had to look back to make sure we hadn't already done this as in, I love that. It's a 3-season series called Slings and Arrows, and it's
great show.
about a theater in Canada. They are struggling. They are professional theater with professional actors, and the executive creative director of the theater dies in the first episode, no big spoiler there, and comes back as a ghost to haunt the guy who takes his place, who used to work at the theater and had a breakdown and left. That's really all you need to know about it. Do you have to love theater? No. But do you need to love comedy? Yeah, it's gonna help because it's a very funny show. It's a very touching show, a heartwarming show. It's brought to you by people who actually went through some of these theater experiences. One of the co-creators is a woman named Susan Coyne, Coyne, who also plays a character in the show. She plays a very beleaguered administrative assistant in the show, but she was an actress. She did theater. She was told while in theater school, you know, you're never gonna get to play Juliet. You're never gonna play, any of the big female roles in Shakespeare. You should just give up. And she didn't give up, and she went on to play all those roles and also, co-write this really, really funny show. Season 1 is all about trying to stage Hamlet with a movie star who's come to town to play the role of Hamlet, not unlike what Keanu Reeves did many years ago when he went to Canada. Season 2 is about the Scottish play, and season 3 is about Lear, primarily because there was an actor who had played Lear in Canada, and the creators of the show wanted to get as much of his Lear on tape as they could, on film as they could before he died. He died, I think, very soon after they finished it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I believe Jim turned me onto the show.
Yeah, I'll take
Uh,
credit.
I will, have links in the show notes too. I'll also have a link to, an interview I did with Susan Coyne about her role in, creating that series and why it went from a half hour to an hour, and her thoughts, on her co-writers wanting her to do, a lovemaking scene and why she didn't wanna do that.
I'd
Anyway,
love to hear that. Will that be in the show notes?
the link to that interview will be yes, it's a written
Alright.
interview, it's not a recorded interview. She also then went on to write the movie The Man Who Invented Christmas.
Oh, you're kidding.
I'm not kidding, I'm guessing that's a favorite of yours.
It is. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Well, you should make that, and I love that at some point, but it's a fun telling of how Charles Dickens had to write A Christmas Carol and how the characters in that story helped him write it, with Christopher Plummer
As
playing, I
Scrooge,
believe, they say the oldest actor to ever portray Scrooge on screen was
I'll believe
Christopher
it.
Plummer. That's my I love that, Slings and Arrows, 3 seasons, wonderfully funny, warm show.
Yeah, and, yeah, I should revisit it because I enjoyed it. I think I've watched all 3 seasons twice, but it's been a long time, maybe 15, 20 years since I watched it, and so I should go back and watch it again.
Well, if I can, there's one particular scene I'm gonna post from season 1 in which the director is working with a not very good actress playing Ophelia. And the scene is set up with him talking to the ghost saying, the problem with acting is, we're pretending to do something, and if the person pretending isn't very good at it, it becomes a problem. And then you see him rehearsing with this young actress who's doing Ophelia's mad scene.
And will not come again. No, no, he is dead. Go to thy deathbed.
Stop! For God's sake, stop.
What?
Where is this coming from?
What?
This staggering about with your mouth open?
You're being sarcastic again with me. Please don't be sarcastic.
No, actually, I'm not, but sorry.
Ophelia's mad.
Right?
I'm playing madness.
Right. And how does staggering about with your mouth open suggest madness?
I'm not mad.
Right.
And I never have been, so I have to simulate it.
Right.
I'm using sense memory. I'm remembering what it was like being stoned, and I'm using that. I'm disoriented. My head is spinning. I think that's what it's probably like when you're insane.
Right. Well, it's not. Trust me. That's what it's like when you're stoned.
Oh, forgive me. I mean no disrespect, but I don't have your experience with insanity.
Right.
And this is hard anyway, because I can't take any meaning from the text. Ophelia's just singing nonsense songs.
Right. Claire. Claire with the hair. Ophelia is a child. She has been dominated by powerful men all of her life, and suddenly they all disappear. Her brother goes to France. Her father is murdered by her boyfriend, and he is shipped off to England. She is alone for the first time, grieving and heartbroken and guilty, because, as far as she's concerned, it's all her fault. She ignored her brother's advice and fell in love with Hamlet, and now her father is dead, all because of her. And the pain and the loss and the shame and the guilt, all of this is gnawing away inside this little child's mind, and it comes out as little songs. And will he not come again? And will he not come again? No, no, he is dead. My father is dead, and I killed him. Okay, now let's try it again without the Vietnam flashback.
It's definitely worth a rewatch on my part. I hope you folks who have never heard of it are right now opening something to find out where you can watch. Where can you watch it? Is it on one of the
Uh,
streams?
It's on streaming services. I have the DVD set, but I know it has turned up on streaming services lately, and it's, if I weren't currently going through all the old Columbos, I would turn to that. But I'm instead enjoying the wonder that is Vito Scotti turning up again and again in Columbo as different ethnic characters.
Yeah. So th- my wife and I stumbled on a series. Actually, she is the one who said, "Hey, we should watch this because it's got people you like in it." A series called No Good Deed. And it stars Ray Romano, who I love, Dennis Leary, who I love, Lisa Kudrow from Cheers, who I love.
Good morning, house hunties.
Wow. Look at Margot. She looks like an AI-generated bitch.
But do you like Margot? Because I can't tell.
If you're serious about making an offer, think about a number and then go way above that.
You look like a nice couple.
Just make sure we find the right buyers.
We have to get out of here before we both lose our minds. Just start packing. I just want to start over.
It's rare you get to meet the sellers. You know all the secrets.
It's a shame people find out what really happened in that house.
Huh? Oh, what?
I enjoyed it immensely. It's dark, it's funny, and their episodes are like half an hour a pop. And we didn't mean to do this. It was not part of the plan, but they kept leaving you hanging at the end of an episode perfectly. So we would look at each other and go, well, let's watch one more. And we burned the entire series in one night because it was just bang, bang, bang. But Ray Romano, I can't say enough good about Ray Romano. Dennis Leary is in it, who I like quite a bit, and it's really quite charming, but dark funny. It's not your standard sitcom.
That sounds great. Where would I find such a series?
It's on the Netflix, and in
Okay.
fact, that series led me to my last I love that from episode 501. So yeah, I know it's strange, but we watched that entire series in one night, and then Netflix says, "Well, if you like that, maybe you're gonna like this thing." And I couldn't I couldn't figure out why the algorithm would suggest coming out of no good
Yeah.
deed, that it would suggest to us 688, which was not in any way, shape, or form connected,
Uh-huh.
in my head anyway. But you know what? Here's the deal. You can question the algorithm all you want. Turns out the algorithm works because I've watched both of those things and both of them became I love that. So, I don't know why it worked, but it did.
Does it bother you at all that the Netflix algorithm knows you better than anyone else?
It's sad, really. It's very sad, but any friend is a good friend, is what I say.
Which is
Oh.
also sad that you're saying that.
It's time we should read. We should read, don't you think?
Well, I think you should read.
All right, well, let's do it. This season, The Linking Rings, folks. We read chapter 1. Just kind of give us a thumbnail, will you, Jen?
Sure. We're at the Magic Circle in London. Harry is getting an award there along with another magician named Oscar. We meet some of the other magicians, and then the show begins, and the curtain opens to reveal that Oscar is dead with a knife in his back, and Harry's standing right next to him. And that leads us right into chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Harry was arrested. Not immediately, of course. First, there was a shocked reaction from the crowd. Legendary British Reserve was in short supply, as it quickly dawned on the audience this was, in fact, not part of the show. Screams were followed by calls for, "Is there a doctor in the house?" Lawrence Baxter was the first to the tableau, looking a bit mystified at what was expected of him, his medical education being long past. He looked at Harry, he looked at Oscar, he looked at the bloody wound in the one-armed man's back, and from where I was now standing, he looked a bit pale and wobbly. Perhaps it had been for the best that he had abandoned medicine in favor of magic. The cries from the crowd had summoned a stern old woman to the stage, clutching a first aid kit in her bony hands. I recognized her as the lady who had been running the coat check. My first impression of her, that she was a dead ringer for Mrs. Danvers from the first film version of Rebecca, was reinforced as she slowly moved across the stage. Despite her slow pace and obvious frail condition, she took immediate and complete charge of the situation. "Oh, Miss Hess, thank God. There's been an accident," Lawrence Baxter said as he turned to her with evident relief. "So I've heard," she said calmly, in what I recognized as probably a German accent. "Move, let me see what the fuss is." He stepped aside and she moved in, glancing first at Harry and then down at the body. "Yes, well, we will not need this," she said, thrusting the first aid kit into Baxter's trembling hands. "This man is beyond bandages and antiseptic spray. If the police have not been called yet, they must be." "But what? Why?" Baxter nearly whimpered. "Because this man is dead," she explained with flat simplicity, and then she hobbled off the stage as slowly as she had arrived. The police reached the same conclusion Miss Hess had come to, albeit without her Germanic directness. In a matter of moments, the auditorium was overcome with a rush of activity. EMTs sprinted in, followed immediately by the police. The order was given for the auditorium to be cleared, and the crowd moved down to the second-floor Devant room and the first-floor club room, where the police would likely question potential witnesses. I had other plans. I grabbed Megan's hand. Eli, we're going in the wrong direction, Megan said as I maneuvered us toward the stage. I have to get to Harry, I said loudly over the hubbub of the retreating crowd. Megan must have agreed with me, for she tightened her grip on my hand as we made slow but steady progress. We pushed upstream against the moving crowd until we reached a door to the left of the stage. I gave it a firm push and was relieved to feel it open. A moment later, we were backstage, which was just as chaotic but not nearly as crowded as the auditorium. The first person I encountered was Liam, the young magician who had so admired my Card Presto product. He was pale and shaken, wiping at his nose with his sleeve. He saw me and shook his head. I moved the chair where they said to, he said, his voice choking. That's all I did was move the chair. Yes, boy, and you keep moving, Miss Hess said, coming up from behind him. This is no place for you now. Move along. Geh rig. Schnell, schnell. I'll give it a rest, another voice cut in. I turned to see Angelica, the female magician I'd seen earlier. She was moving through the backstage area, headed toward the door we had just come through. Give the poor lad a moment to breathe, for bloody sake, you heartless old crone. She draped an arm over the teenager's shoulder, while the old German woman mumbled something unintelligible before turning and heading away, making her way slowly through a small crowd of police. Come on. They need us out of here, love, Angelica said to the teen. Let's head downstairs and see what's what. We stepped aside. She guided the boy through the door, and the two of them disappeared back into the auditorium. We finally spotted Harry, deep in conversation with a man and a woman I guessed were the British version of plainclothes detectives. They were just outside of an area which had been quickly cordoned off by the crime scene team. Their version of a CSI tech was snapping photos of Oscar, who was still slumped over in his large wooden throne. Harry glanced my way and nodded, which I took to mean that, under the circumstances, he was doing okay. Made me feel a little better, but not by much. I wanted to walk over and confirm this with him. However, given the demeanor of the police who were questioning him, I suspected Harry was out of bounds, at least for the next few minutes. Eli! I turned toward the sound of my name and saw Lawrence Baxter waving me over to a small group huddled on the far side of the stage. Steering clear of the crime scene, Megan and I snaked our way across the backstage area and joined the small assembly. I recognized the hefty British comic magician Angus Bishop and a renowned mentalist who went by the single name Boris, spelled Borys. Like Baxter, both were in their 70s, and although they were not as decrepit as Miss Hess, neither had the same youthful energy Baxter projected. Joining the group as we arrived was another older gentleman with the whitest hair I had ever seen. While his deep tan appeared genuine, there was something about his hair that didn't. Although probably just as old as his contemporaries in this small group, his frosty hair gave him an ageless and timeless look. He leaned into the group and whispered conspiratorially, but not quietly. "Harry didn't do it, I'm sure of it," he said in a clipped American accent. "I couldn't get very close, but from what I could see, it appeared the knife actually came out of the base of the chair, attached to an armature of some kind. It traveled up on an arc, sweeping up behind the chair directly into the occupant's back. Then, via some mechanism I couldn't discern, the arm swung back underneath the chair. But the knife did not," Lawrence Baxter added dryly. "Sadly, no," the white-haired man agreed. He glanced over at me and Megan, then back to Lawrence Baxter, who immediately picked up the social cue. "Ah, yes, this is Harry Mark's nephew, Eli," he said, reaching out and patting my shoulder. "And," he continued, tossing the next introduction to me. "And this is Megan," I said, unnecessarily putting my arm around her shoulder. I wasn't sure what other words were needed to describe our relationship. Calling her my girlfriend? made me feel like we were still in junior high, while referring to her as my partner sounded like we worked together in a law firm. It was my strategy to lock down a more permanent relationship status while on this trip, but for the time being, I just let her name hang in the air. Baxter continued the introductions. Brilliant. Of course, this is Angus Bishop, he continued, gesturing toward the broadly built gentleman to his left. And Boris, he added, indicating the thin, wiry man who was dwarfed next to Angus. And of course, Davis de Vries, he added, referring to the man with the amazingly white hair. I certainly know all of you by reputation, I said, quickly shaking hands with each of the older gentlemen. Angus, not surprisingly, had a strong grip in proportion to his bulk. I've never actually met a longshoreman, but I suspect some of them would be intimidated by Angus's size and girth, despite his advancing years. Boris was slighter of build, short and rail-thin, with wide eyes which had both a feral and fearful quality. His grip was non-existent, like shaking hands with a wisp of air, while Davis de Vries shook my hand enthusiastically for several seconds longer than necessary. They all then turned to Megan, clearly far more interested in shaking hands with her. Having spent more than her fair share of time in the company of old magicians who fawned over younger women, she complied graciously. I'm not a magician, she explained to the group, but Eli prepped me on all the performers who were going to be part of the celebration, except, she added, turning to Davis de Vries, for you. Just so, he said, breaking into a wide smile. I'm the performer behind the performers, the man behind the curtain, as it were. De Vries builds many of the best illusions we all use, Baxter said, then noticed Boris was shrugging at this description. That is to say, all of us who do big-box illusions. Mr. de Vries created the Baker's Dozen, I explained to Megan. We saw it last year at the Magic Live convention in Las Vegas. You know, the illusion where it appears the magician cuts the assistant into 13 even slices. Megan reflexively shuddered at the memory, producing a slight chuckle from de Vries. Not to worry. I'm currently working on a gluten-free version, he said, offering a practiced one-liner. Polite chuckles were had all around. He'll also be unveiling his latest creation this week, although he's too modest to tout it, Lawrence Baxter added. The Catherine Wheel should be a corker. There were excited rumbles of agreement on this point, and then, collectively, the group suddenly seemed to realize that a somber attitude would be more appropriate given the situation. For example, the fact Oscar Corhonen was still slumped over in his chair on the other side of the stage. Well, yes. Anyway, Baxter continued, we must do whatever the police require of us to sort this mess out as quickly as possible. Terrible thing. There were nods of assent all around, but no actual plan was suggested. I was about to point out this missing element when I noticed Harry and the two plainclothes police officers moving toward us. I thought they were coming to talk to us, but their pace didn't slacken as they veered around the group, heading for the stage door in the back. Harry's wrists were handcuffed, but he was able to turn toward me and speak before they pulled him through the door and into the stairwell. These are not the linking rings I was planning on employing this evening, he said with a weak smile, gesturing to the cuffs while clearly working hard to keep any fear out of his voice. Don't worry, Eli, we'll get this sorted out. The small group watched as the stage door closed ominously behind him. The group of old men then turned to me. I'm sure their expressions mirrored mine, and we were all thinking a similar thought. Getting this all sorted out might not be quite as easy as Harry was suggesting. One of the uniformed constables told us which police station Harry had been taken to, so I excused Megan and myself from the group with the promise to keep them all apprised of what we learned. Lawrence Baxter pressed a business card in my hand, and then Megan and I headed downstairs to call a cab. Megan reminded me we needed to retrieve our coats, which meant standing in a short but slow-moving line in front of the coat check window. As we inched forward, I could see the attendant, Miss Hess, inspect each claim stub closely, as if there had been a recent rash of counterfeit claims and subsequent missing coats. After each examination, she would disappear into the bowels of her cloakroom for what seemed like a long time for such a simple and direct mission. Then she would return and hand over the coat, still bristling with suspicion as she shooed the person away and indicated the next in line should get a move on. Very few actual words were exchanged throughout. Instead, this was all communicated with a harsh series of grimaces, scowls, and Teutonic-sounding grunts. Since we had arrived separately, we each presented her with our own claim tickets. She looked closely at both tickets and then just as intently at the two of us. "You arrive unaccompanied and yet depart jointly," she said, more statement than question, lacing the comment with what sounded like a heaping dollop of judgment for good measure. "That is curious." "Life is curious," I countered, deciding this scary old lady had not cornered the market on enigmatic phraseology. "In more ways than you'll ever know," she replied quietly as she turned to retrieve our items. Each of our coats, neither of which struck me as being particularly heavy, were of sufficient bulk that the old woman felt the need to bring them to us separately. She struggled with each coat as if its pockets were loaded down with heavy stones. Finally, she finished with us, handing Megan her coat without a word, then signaled to the patron behind us that their time had in fact come. "A flight risk? That's absurd!" I huffed indignantly. Sadly, my voice cracked on the last word, thereby sucking any authority out of my intended outrage. The police detective, a tired woman in her early 40s who identified herself as Detective Inspector Matthews, sighed and continued her explanation of their reasons for holding Harry in a jail cell overnight and why my request to see him had been denied. Her accent was a delightful mix of British and Indian, but currently that was the only thing about her that might be considered delightful. To be fair, I imagine she wasn't finding me to be particularly enchanting either. "As I explained, Mr. Marks, this is a capital crime. Your uncle's behavior is, at the very least, questionable." "Really? How do you figure?" D.I. Matthews sighed deeply and looked down at her notes. "He arrived at 2:30 this afternoon from the U.S. for, he claims, the sole purpose of being on stage with the victim this evening. He booked a hotel for one night only. He came to the scene of the crime directly from the airport, and although he claimed to be staying in town for just one night, he had checked 2 large bags for the flight. He and the victim were alone backstage for several minutes. He was standing next to Mr. She glanced down at her notes. Next to Mr. Corhonen when he was killed. And he is holding a return airline ticket that will take him out of the country tomorrow at noon, a mere 12 hours from now." She set her notes down and looked across the table at me. "All in all, singly and in its totality, this is behavior we on the force would judge to be at the very least questionable." "He didn't kill him," I began, but she held up a hand. "That is not for you or me to determine, sir," Matthews said firmly. "If the decision is made to charge your uncle, which I believe to be highly likely, our legal system will do an excellent job of determining his guilt or innocence. But for the time being, specifically this evening, he is considered a flight risk and will remain under our supervision until tomorrow at the earliest, at which time our prosecutors will determine and present their next steps." Although the accent and some of the terminology was different, this all had a very familiar ring to me. My ex-wife was an assistant district attorney back in Minneapolis, and her new husband was a hulking golem who made his living as a homicide detective. I had been on the receiving end of his sleep-inducing officiousness on more than one occasion. If experience has taught me anything, it was that it was fruitless to argue with City Hall, particularly if City Hall had taken the human form of an underpaid and overworked homicide detective. Now it is my recommendation that you return to your hotel and come back in the morning, and at that time we will have more information to share on your uncle and his situation vis-a-vis this ongoing murder investigation. I'm sure there are some fundamental differences between the U.S. and British criminal justice systems, but the way all their people straighten up papers and close folders to signal the end of a conversation is eerily identical. It was a return trip to the hotel for Megan, but the first time for me. The streets were dark, and my sense of direction was a shambles. So instead of being adventurous and exploring the subway system, we hopped into a nearby cab. Megan had the hotel's name and address at her fingertips, and a few minutes later, we pulled up to what was going to be our home away from home for the next week on our first vacation as a couple. The exterior looked a little worn and run down, but I chalked it up to the poor street lighting and a moonless night. The interior, however, had no such excuses to fall back on. "Isn't it adorable?" Megan whispered as we made our way down the front hallway toward the small lobby. "It's like stepping back in time." "You mean before the invention of the vacuum cleaner?" I suggested. I looked down, convinced small puffs of dust were emanating from each step we made on the worn carpet. The fuzzy first impression the foyer made was reinforced tenfold the moment we entered the small lobby. Mismatched Christmas lights had been strung haphazardly over the front desk, although most of the bulbs weren't lit. A worn, lopsided couch sat by the window next to a rack filled with faded tourist brochures. Beside the rack was a wobbly-looking card table with what could only be called a vintage PC atop it. The computer screen glowed a sickly green. Someone with either no sense of irony or the finest wit since Oscar Wilde had printed up a small dot matrix placard touting the table as the Busness Center. Yes, business was in fact misspelled. "What was the Yelp rating on this place?" I asked Megan quietly as we waited for the hairy desk clerk to finish what sounded like an angry phone call. His tone was indignant, which was evident regardless of the language. It sounded like Russian, but my knowledge of that language was confined to villains trying in vain to kill James Bond. "Oh, the reviews were terrible, but I read through them, and the criticisms were just dumb Americans complaining about moronic things," she explained happily. "I love it here." Before I could inquire as to which things the dumb Americans had railed against, the desk clerk finished his call by slamming the receiver down hard on the cradle and saying something that sounded like a curse, regardless of the language. He then looked up and gave us, well, Megan at least, a toothy smile. "You are back," he said as he turned to the crooked set of wooden cubbies hanging precariously on the wall behind him. "Your night was good?" "It was interesting," Megan said as he handed her the key. It was attached by what appeared to be baling wire to a plastic tag bearing our room number. "Interesting is good?" he asked, still smiling his toothy grin. His short cropped hair stood straight up on top of his head, while his bright blue eyes bulged just the tiniest bit. "Interesting is good, yes," Megan agreed. "Good night." "Good night to you and to you too, sir," he said, waving at us happily as we moved out of the lobby and back to the hallway. I followed Megan, who took a confident leap, leading us to the elevator door. She pushed the up button. "Russian?" I asked. She shrugged. "I've no idea, but he's clearly not from around here." "Well, neither are we," I said, and then looked over at the elevator doors as they wobbled open. A dim light illuminated the elevator car, but that term was giving it way too much credit. It was like a phone booth, but smaller. "This may be the smallest elevator I've ever seen," I said. "I've seen dumbwaiters more spacious." "I know. Isn't it great?" she beamed as she stepped in. I turned sideways and wedged myself into the small box. Megan pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors quavered shut, and with a small lurch, the elevator began to climb. You know, I once made a refrigerator box for it that was bigger than this elevator, I observed, marveling at the tiny space. How did you ever get upstairs with all of our luggage? Oh, that was easy, she said, turning so my elbow wasn't digging into her shoulder. I just piled all the bags in here, hit the button for our floor, then ran up the stairs. Let me guess. You beat the elevator by a considerable margin, I suggested, as the car whined and stuttered its way up. They call it a lift, and yes, I had plenty of time to catch my breath, if that's what you mean. I was going to continue the conversational topic, but I began to fear we'd run out of oxygen in the small space, so I just nodded and waited for the ride to be over. Sleep came quickly, and my only dreams consisted of continually awaking, thinking I was trapped inside a coffin. You might think I was flashing back to our ride up in the lift, but when it came to small spaces, our room gave the elevator a run for its money. I had already assembled a growing mental list I was sure would match up, point by point, with the complaints generated by the dumb Americans on Yelp. For her part, Megan loved the place, so I wisely kept my mouth shut. The fact was, the inconveniences were minor, and we had come to London to see the sights, not to become roving hotel critics. Seeing her happy and having fun erased any other issues I might be having with our accommodations. Once we were showered and dressed, we made our way to the communal breakfast room and showed our room key, which entitled each of us to what was advertised as a traditional English breakfast. Moments after we had settled in, before they had even offered coffee or tea, a wait person delivered 2 overflowing plates to our table and then disappeared as quickly as she had come. I looked down at the plate that had been put in front of me, then looked to see if a similar disaster had befallen Megan. "What is this?" I asked, my voice a little hoarse, either from lack of use or flat-out fear. "It's a traditional English breakfast," Megan said brightly. "No, seriously, what is this?" She picked up her fork and pointed tentatively at each of the alleged food items on the plate as she introduced them. "I think this is back bacon. Those are fried eggs. This looks like a grilled tomato, and that's gotta be a mushroom of some kind. Those are sausages, and this pile here is baked beans." She sat back, clearly proud of her achievement. She had tried to sound authoritative, but I could tell she was flat out guessing at a couple of items. I looked at the plate again, then at the waitstaff as they bustled around the room. Did we do something wrong? Are they mad at us? A buzz alerted me to a text from Lawrence Baxter, informing me that he'd secured a lawyer, a solicitor in his terminology, who would be meeting with Harry as soon as they would allow him this morning. Baxter suggested meeting at the police station at 10:30. I texted back we would see him there. "You can always spot the Americans," Megan whispered, nodding at a couple as they entered and were seated by the hostess, even before they say a word. I was about to question the validity of this statement when the female half of the duo said in a too loud and grating American accent, "Oh, do we have to sit by a radiator?" She spat out the word like someone who had been relocated against their will to a site less desirable than Chernobyl or Love Canal. Megan was ahead. One love. And I made the mental note that if asked, I would say we hailed from Canada. The game then became guessing the nationality of the people who weren't obviously Americans. Megan had a better facility with languages than I did, so she was able to offer linguistic predictions with far greater speed and accuracy than I could. For example, her prediction the little boy with the Harry Potter glasses was French proved dead on when he continually ignored his mother's request to stop swinging his legs while he sat, repeating the word "none" over and over again. To love. We did agree the family across from us grandmother, mother, and a younger boy were likely Russian or perhaps Ukrainian. They ate silently, but I heard the grandmother whisper, "Edidadoshkai," to her table mates. My wish to be able to translate it was granted a few moments later, when the woman I was assuming was her daughter whispered to the younger boy, "For pop-pop." With these instructions in place, the two each handed the grandmother an item from their plate, a roll from one and an apple from the other, which she stealthily slipped into her purse. My study of this interesting family dynamic was interrupted by the appearance of two very large and very loud Americans who squeezed into the table directly next to ours and began a long series of complaints concerning just about everything in sight. Before they could add us to their list, we finished our coffee and quickly exited. The police station was no less cheery in the light of day. Lawrence Baxter met us at the front door and filled us in as we made our way down to the gray, airless visitor waiting area. There was a surprising amount of activity for a Sunday morning, probably all stemming from Saturday night incidents, hopefully all less deadly than the one at the Magic Circle. "My solicitor's in with Harry now," he said quietly. "He said, given this is a capital crime, they are well within their rights to hold Harry for 72 hours before charging him." "So he thinks they're going to charge him?" I said, speaking much louder than intended. Baxter shook his head. "He's not sure. My understanding is the prosecutor will bring the facts of the case before a magistrate tomorrow morning. The magistrate will determine if there is enough evidence to warrant pressing charges." He gestured toward 3 empty chairs in the crowded waiting room. "So, at the very least, Harry isn't getting out today." I exchanged a look with Megan as we sat. It was clear we were both thinking the same question, but I said it out loud first. "Which one of us is going to call Franny?" Megan shrugged, and I shrugged in return. We had agreed to hold off calling Harry's soon-to-be new bride until we had more information. Currently, I wasn't quite sure if what Lawrence Baxter had related counted as enough intelligence to bring Franny up to speed without simultaneously throwing her into a panic. "She told him not to take this trip," Megan reminded me softly. "I know, but it seems unlikely Franny would take this down the I-told-you-so road. At least, not right away. Plus, she was planning on picking him up at the airport." I looked at my watch, which I had not reset. It's not even 6 a.m. in Minneapolis. We might as well wait until she's up. No need to get her out of bed at this point. Megan nodded in agreement, and I turned to Lawrence, but he held up a hand. "Here's Wexler Smith," he said, looking toward the heavy steel door that stood between visitors and the poor souls they had come to visit. Just coming through the entry was a middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit, making him the odds-on favorite as the best-dressed person in the room. His bushy white mustache and eyebrows gave him a sad hangdog appearance, which was reinforced by his slumped posture and slow, ponderous step. "Nothing too positive to report, Baxter, sorry to say," he said in a low, Nigel Bruce-like growl. "Too much red tape. High visibility of the crime, flight risk, foreigner. It all adds up. Bad business, if you ask me. Strictly by the book on this one. That's my guess." Lawrence Baxter nodded at the recitation, then introduced us to Simon Wexler Smith, his longtime solicitor. The sad-faced man mumbled some words of condolence as he shook hands with me, then Megan. "What are our next steps?" Baxter asked once the social niceties had been acknowledged. "Wait for the magistrate's decision," Wexler Smith replied confidently. "Not much we can do until then, I'm afraid. Hands tied and all that." "Any chance I can see Harry?" I cut in, looking from lawyer to Baxter. "Like, this morning? Now?" Figuring Wexler Smith was the one with the power, I concentrated my attention on him, but he turned impotently to Baxter. The solicitor may have been an expert on law, but Lawrence Baxter was a bona fide star in this country, and that would likely count for more. "Let me see what I can do," Baxter said quietly, unnecessarily straightening his suit jacket as he headed toward the main desk. 5 minutes later, I was being ushered through the imposing metal door, which closed with a sickening thud behind me. Getting through the entry was just the first step in a journey which included emptying all my pockets, going through 2 different scanners, and then a full-body pat-down by a clammy-handed middle-aged constable who, I sensed, had already reached his maximum level of tedium by this early hour. Regardless of how my day was going to go, I thought, as they led me down the 3rd blank hallway, his was likely to consist of performing this same series of actions on a never-ending stream of strangers. Made me feel a little better, but not much. My Uncle Harry was not a large man. He resisted the word elfin, but it wasn't far off the mark. However, when I first spotted him on the other side of the glass in the cramped booth where they'd placed him, he seemed even smaller than usual. I sat down on the hard plastic chair on my side of the glass. We reached for our respective phone receivers at the same time, and then paused before saying anything into them. My receiver was warm and a bit sticky. "I know what you're thinking," he finally said, his voice sounding tired, distant, and tinny through the receiver. "And I agree. Orange is not my color." He glanced down at the jail-issued jumpsuit and gave an exaggerated shudder. "And I don't even dare consider how they may have hung up my tux," he added, "if they've hung it up at all." For Harry, and many magicians of his era, the proper care and storage of one's tux was an issue of paramount importance, right up there with cleaning your coins and ironing your silks. In fact, once he was dressed in his tux before a show, Harry absolutely refused to sit down, as he felt bending his knees would negatively impact the line of his trousers. It was possible that attitude may have helped to save his life the night before, as it was Oscar who, apparently harboring no such qualms about the line of his tux, had opted to take a seat in the deadly chair. "Are you doing okay?" I asked, figuring we must be on a set time limit and wanting to make the most of what might be a short conversation. He shrugged. "Not bad. The people have been nice. The cell, however, is tiny, minuscule." I thought of mentioning the size of our hotel room, but quickly decided this was not the right time for a quick game of travel adversity one-upmanship. "Have you talked to Franny?" he continued, his brow furrowing in worry. I shook my head. "Megan and I decided to wait until I'd seen you," I said, "so we could give her a more complete report." He nodded at the decision, but I could tell he was concerned about her reaction to the news. "She told me not to come," he said. "She said there were bad vibrations." "You met her more than halfway," I countered. "Only staying one night, getting in and getting out quickly. It was a good compromise." "Yes, with apparently sparkling results." I didn't have a helpful response, so I changed the subject. "What have they told you about what happened to Oscar?" "Nothing directly, but I've heard enough to piece most of it together," he said, leaning forward as he shifted into magic instructor mode, a persona I had experienced my whole life. "Apparently, there was a device in the chair. As soon as one sat on the cushion, the pressure triggered the release of an arm on a powerful spring under the seat. It shot up out of the back of the chair on a semicircle and plunged the knife into the poor fellow's back. Then the arm retracted. Very clever, actually," he added, acknowledging his grudging admiration at the design of the deadly device. "Well, that's basically what Davis DeVries thought happened," I said, quickly recounting my short conversation with the small group of old magicians backstage. "Yes, of course DeVries had figured out quickly," Harry said. "Those sorts of mechanics are right up his alley." I don't think he recognized the implications of this statement, but he was already on to another topic before I could press him on it. I made a mental note to come back to that thought at some point. "The thing is, Buster, It was only a couple of moments before the curtain even opened that the two of us decided who would be sitting and who would be standing, Harry said, turning as the door to his cubicle opened behind him. A guard stood there, silently indicating the time was up. We'd gone back and forth on that decision for nearly 30 minutes, and we finally just decided it with a coin flip. He turned to the guard and acknowledged his presence, indicating we were wrapping things up. Harry, I want to do something to move this thing along, but I have no idea what I should be doing. He turned back to me, standing, but still holding on to the receiver. I thought of it the moment I woke up, and then kicked myself for not thinking of it last night. We've got to get in touch with McHugh. As soon as he mentioned the name, I wanted to kick myself as well. McHugh was the one person who should have been my first phone call the previous night. Yes, of course, I said, also standing, although I wasn't entirely certain why. How do I find him? What day is it? Harry asked, moving as slowly as he could to hang the receiver back up on its hook. Sunday, I said quickly. Perfect, Harry said as he backed away from the chair, still holding the phone. Tower Hill Tube Stop, 7:30 tonight, sharp. The guard took the receiver from Harry's hand and hung it up. I nodded furiously that I understood. As he was being ushered out of the cubicle, he turned and added one final thought. I could hear his voice distantly through the not-so-soundproof glass. And Eli? He said. Yes? I shouted. He was able to get his last words in before the door slammed shut. Wear comfortable shoes!
Wear comfortable shoes.
Smart stuff right there, baby.
If you're walking in London on those old cobblestone streets.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Anyway, this one did touch on a couple of fun points. People who go to London for a vacation, if you haven't ever been there before, and you book a hotel, keep in mind, unless it's like a brand new building, if it's like this reconverted thing, very small hotel rooms, very, very small hotel rooms. And if you've never been confronted with the traditional English breakfast, if you're in a nice hotel, it's gonna surprise you a little bit because it's going to be eggs, kind of, and fried tomatoes and back bacon
Beans.
and baked beans and
Beans.
yes,
I don't
and
know.
the presentation can be a little off-putting. The first one I had, my wife and I were in London, and we went early in the morning to northern London to a greyhound racing track because we wanted to see the dogs.
Oh, your buddies.
And as part of your admission, when you sat down at your table, they put a traditional English breakfast in front of me that all I could think of was, this is no boating accident.
The torso has been severed in mid-thorax. There are no major organs remaining. May I have a glass of water, please? Right arm has been severed above the elbow with massive tissue loss in the upper musculature. Partially denuded bone remaining. This was no boat accident. Did you notify the Coast Guard about this?
It was like, this is the most horrific thing I've ever seen in my life.
You know what
Ever.
I said the first time I saw it? This is why we won the Revolutionary War. How could you eat this for breakfast and expect
Yeah.
a war?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not for me.
No, and then the insult to it is, do you want toast with that? Yes. And they bring you this thing where maybe the toast was toasted at one point, but it's in a device designed to cool off the toast as quickly as possible.
But I love it over there. It's the place I would go at the drop of a hat. Reach over, drop a hat. I'll go to London right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's just those are a couple things. That and the size of in these small hotels, the size of the elevators will also surprise you. Because it's like, well,
Exactly.
you can put your bag in there and one child maybe, and then you run up the stairs and meet them. There's just no
Try
room.
to stay on a low floor, I think, is the
If you can.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. All right. So that is what we have to say about chapter 2. Next time around, we're going to have a really fun chat with a magician named Star Newman, who started here in the Twin Cities and then has moved around since then. But what's interesting about Star, among many things, is she's kept up her relationship with an excellent teacher who we've had on the show, Tyler Erickson. And
Ah,
so we got them together on Zoom to talk about the importance of that teacher relationship and continuing that teacher relationship even as you continue into professional career. And we could probably have the same conversation with Tyler and Nick DeFont, but I wanted to talk to Star just because I missed a chance to see her here in town and hope to see her next time she's through. And she's just fun and funny, and she and Tyler are a great pair to talk about the importance of continuing education as a magician.
amen. I look forward to that, boy. I'll tell you what, this podcast, even if no one else is listening, I'm enjoying it.
You'll have to listen to it sometime.
I will. It's
You-
on the top of my list. Second, I guess, after Slings and Arrows. Then I'll come back to the podcast.
Sounds perfect. All right, that's it for this time around. We'll see you next time for Chapter 3 in episode 503. Bye, everybody.
Be good.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.